All right, now that we have our game item class created, it is time for us to move on to phase 2, creating our engine and seeing our player move within our functioning engine. All right, so to do that, let's go ahead and take a look at the implementation plan. We've got graphical assets. Let's go ahead and get some graphics copied over and assets brought into our project.
Before I even do that, I'm going to, inside of the project in the Solution Explorer, add a folder to hold graphics.
Okay.
So I'm going to add a new folder. We'll call this folder Textures. Alright, with our Textures folder, we now have, if we look inside of our project, there's Canon 3 project folder. There is our Textures folder. Now, I'm going to go back to the original folder that we have on C drive that has all of the graphics for Canon. So I'll simply copy those and paste them into Textures. Now we can go back into Visual Studio, right-click on the Textures folder, and we'll add, but this time we'll add from existing item. And from inside this, we're inside the Canon 3 project folder, so I can open up our Textures folder, change the type of file to Content Pipeline Files, and select all of the texture, or all the picture
PNGs.
files.
Yeah. So there they are, and all the assets are set up. You can see the associated asset name for lives, and if you click down, player, projectile, all of them. Okay? So very good. So now that we have that brought in, the next thing on the implementation plan was copy variables from Canon 2.
All right. Let's jump back into Canon 2. Let's jump back over to the main game, and let's steal, well, all of the variables up until the random. So we'll copy from the beginning, we get our screen height, screen width, screen height, and so on and so forth, all the way down to random. All right. So let's move back into Canon 3, back to our Game 1 file, and now let's jump in, let's say right before where we have the variable for the Graphics Device Manager. Let's jump a line or two before that and paste all of these variables in, and then add another spacing line.
Okay, and you're going to be creating a new variable according to the implementation plan. This is where we create our sprite batch variable.
All right, let me jump in right below the Content Manager and create our sprite batch here. So I'll have a sprite batch called sprite batch. All right.
Okay. Now, next thing we've got was skeleton in the mechanics, the one mechanics method, which is our update player.
All right. Let me jump down to past all of the engine methods that are already in place. Jump down right below draw, and let me start the region for gameplay methods. So this will be a region called gameplay, or no, this is mechanics.
Yeah.
I'm typing the wrong thing. This will be our mechanics methods. And it'll end the region. Alright, one mechanics method that we're going to have right now is update player. So let's see, this is going to be our private void update player. And that takes care of that. So we have update player all skeletoned in.
Okay, so the next thing that we had was the set the preferred back buffer width and height in the constructor.
Getting the screen size set up.
Yep.
So let's jump back up to the constructor. And I'll jump in on a line right after where we had created the graphics object. So we'll then turn around and refer to that graphics object and tell it to set the preferred back buffer width to be equal to our screen width, the constant that we copied from Canon 2. And then we'll turn around, address graphics again, this time setting the preferred back buffer height to be equal to screen height.
Okay, very good. All right, so the next thing we need to do was to go ahead and create the sprite batch and the random object and initialize.
Okay, let's jump down to the initialize section. I'll wipe out the comment, and we'll begin with sprite batch. We'll say that our sprite batch is equal to a new sprite batch. But sprite batch, when it's constructed, takes in a parameter. We need to tell the sprite batch what graphics device it's going to use. And the graphics device we want is stored in the graphics object. Graphics holds a graphics device, which is what we need to feed over to sprite batch. So we'll feed in graphics.graphicsDevice. That takes care of sprite batch. Now we also need to create our random object, and this is same as before, random equals new random.
All right, very good. Now you've got another step in the implementation plan, which was set up the sprite batch begin and end in the draw method.
Okay, we're going to set this up ahead of time so that when we get into actually calling draw, we have everything ready to go. Because, of course, in the game item where we set up the sprite batch, we never called begin or end.
And that has to be called if we're going to draw anything with the sprite batch.
Right, so we need to go to draw and make sure that the sprite batch is ready to draw before we actually try to draw anything. So I'll wipe out the comment inside of draw and put down sprite batch dot begin, and jump down an extra line and put in sprite batch dot end.
Okay, very cool. So let's see, the next thing you've got on here is time to go ahead and turn our attention over to the player. It's player game item, so we need to go ahead and get that variable set up.
Alright, let's jump back up to the top and all of our variables, and let's jump in, anywhere would work here, I guess right after our gameplay stuff.
Okay, that'll work.
Last time I had stuff lower down, but I don't want to get it too confused with some of the engine-related stuff.
No, that's fine.
So I'll jump in right before random. Alright, this is, of course, going to be a game item called player.
Okay, so now let's go ahead and start getting everything set up.
Alright, let's jump down to, go to initialize and create the player. So player is equal to a new game item.
Okay, let's go ahead and get the graphic loaded in.
Alright, and this is where the interesting stuff happens, but really pretty much the same as in the simple XNA app.
Just look where he's at. He's inside the load graphics content method, up inside the if for load all content.
And if you remember back to the simple app, this is where we said that the texture was equal to contentmanager.load.
That's right.
In this case, we don't directly have a texture, but we do have one inside of player.
And that's not contentmanager.load, it's just content.load, which content is a content manager.
Yeah, exactly. It is a content manager called content.
Yep.
But the key here is we need to load this into a texture. So I'll use the player's texture, and I'll set that to content.load, where I need to specify the type. So I'll put in texture 2D, and then the actual asset that I want to load is within the textures folder, and it's called player. So I'll begin this string with the @ symbol so that we use a literal string, and then, or not literal, but I mean the exact characters, no escape characters. And we'll put in the folder, so textures slash player. And then we'll end off the quotes, end off the parenthesis, and terminator.
All right, very good. All right, so the next thing was call the update player from within the update method.
Okay, jump down past unload over to update. I will again wipe out the comment and instead place a call to update player.
All right, and we need to go ahead and call the player's draw from within draw.
Okay, and not only within draw, but make sure we do this within or between the sprite batch begin and end.
That's
so
right.
that the sprite batch is in a state where it's ready to draw. But from here, it's a call not to sprite batch, but to player. We tell player to draw. Now, the player's draw method takes in a sprite batch. Again, the player has to know what sprite batch to use for drawing. So we'll feed it sprite batch, the one we've been using thus far. So we begin the sprite batch. We then feed that sprite batch over to player through the draw method, and then we end.
Okay. And at this point, all we need to do is code in the update player, and we're in good shape.
As a matter of fact, with the player starting at 0, 0, we should be able to build and run and see the player up at the top left corner of the screen.
Okay.
So I'll do a build, make sure we haven't introduced any errors. And nope, only have our few warnings. So let's run. And there we go. There's the player in the top left corner. So now we just need to get the player moving.
Okay.
Alright, player movement. Now we need to code in update player, and we need to get, of course, access to the mouse, which is slightly different in this case. But let me begin. I'm actually toying with the idea of copying some of the code over from
if you want to, feel free.
I think I'll do that, just so we can point out some of the differences. Let me jump back to Canon 2, back under the game code itself, and we should have update player as part of the mechanics method. So you see here where I've got all of the regions collapsed. Let me jump into mechanics. Jump to the top of mechanics where we have update player, and let me steal some code. Because I like the way that one was laid out with the integer variables ahead of time. Player X. Alright, this is where things get interesting. We don't have point to client because we don't have any of the control stuff. So I'm going to wipe that part out. Instead, we need to access the mouse as presented in XNA, which is mouse. And in order to get any of its properties, we need to get the mouse's state. So I'll access mouse.getState. I don't want to deal with storing a mouse state, so I'm going to directly take the result of that and feed in the getState.x into player X. And for player Y, that should remain the same. We have a screen height, and we have a player.origin.y. So I should be able to build at this point, and everything builds. And now if I run, there we go.
Haha, very cool.
So code successfully ported from Canon 2.
Okay.
All right.
All right, so let's see. Anything else?
I think that's all we're setting out to do in this one. Again, the point of this was to get player usable and visible within the game. I guess we could do one other thing. And yeah, you're already on top of it. We in all the games up until now, we've been using the Windows gray style color,
right,
which we don't have in XNA directly. So I'm going to change where we're clearing the background and change it to that color.
And this is, once again, inside the draw method. Very first thing we're doing, graphics.graphicsdevice.clear, and we feed it a color. So we're going to give it an RBG here.
Because the key here is that we don't have an exact gray to match the Windows button color. As a matter of fact, if I put in gray, is that the right gray? Yeah. You see gray is a darker gray than it was in Windows. So we need to specify or be able to specify an exact RGB value.
Right.
So I'm going to take all of this out and instead make a new color, because one of color's constructors takes in RGB values. So we can take in our case, with our desktop, it's 212, 208, 200, and finish off the parenthesis.
I just realized I may have said RBG. There we go. That looks good.
And of course, if you're running different settings within Windows, these values will be different for your Windows itself. Because again, this is hard-coded now to our Windows color. But again, this is only here just so that we can mimic Canon 2 exactly.
Okay. So with that, that's everything that we needed to get done here in the implementation plan for this phase of setting up the engine. So that's going to wrap up this video. Thanks a lot.